In this recipe, we're creating a really traditional but beautiful gingerbread house. We're going to create some gingerbread and finish it with some royal icing. Prior to watching this video, I do recommend you watch our video on paper piping cones before you start. This is a great gingerbread recipe. What makes it so fantastic is the fact that it bakes so evenly. So we get very few air bubbles, which gives us a beautiful finish for our house. So to start with, for the gingerbread, we're going to place flour in the mixer. Now with this gingerbread recipe, I have halved it and I'm doing half the recipe at a time. If you've got a bigger mixer than I have, bigger than this KitchenAid artisan mixer, you can do the full recipe all at once. We've got the flour in there. We're now going to add some gingerbread spice. Now if you haven't got gingerbread spice or you can't source it, we will give you the ingredients to make your own gingerbread spice with individual spices. Going to add in sugar. We're now going to add in the honey. Now I'm just using a blended honey, but you can use something like a leatherwood or an orange blossom honey or a manuka honey to give you a very distinctive flavour in your gingerbread. We're going to add in some unsalted butter. So all the ingredients apart from the hot water and the bicarb soda go in at the start. So we're going to mix these ingredients just until it comes to a fine powder and there's no large lumps of butter. Now I have some water here that I've taken straight from the kettle, so it's at boiling temperature. I'm going to add the bicarb soda in. What happens when we mix the bicarb with the hot water is we release all the gas. That's why we don't get any large air bubbles in the gingerbread. So just add that in and you can see it'll foam up a little bit. Now that we've got no lumps of butter, I'm going to add the bicarb soda and hot water in and just bring it together until it creates a dough. Now that has come together as a dough and you can roll it out immediately if your room temperature is not too warm. If your room temperature is warm, maybe pop it in the fridge for about 30 minutes, wrapped in plastic wrap, but press it into a flat disc about 1 centimetre in thickness. If you are wrapping the dough, just place a piece of plastic wrap out, put the gingerbread on top. Because it has very little butter, it doesn't actually need to be chilled for very long, and it's quite easy to roll it out immediately. We're going to place that in the fridge for about 30 minutes before rolling it out. I've got a batch of gingerbread here that I've already chilled. So I'm going to take that out and I'm going to cut half of it. So this is half of the full gingerbread batch. And we just roll out half at a time. And then we mix our scraps with the other half. Don't roll it out too smaller pieces, because the gingerbread template we have is quite large. Otherwise it won't be big enough for you to actually cut out the pieces for your house. Now before you start rolling, you will need to cut out pieces of cardboard with the templates we've provided to enable you to cut out the pieces for your house. We're going to lightly dust the bench surface. So just with a sprinkle of flour. Just if you pinch the flour in your fingers, and then if you move your fingers, it'll mean that you get a light, even dusting of flour. We're going to lightly dust the top with flour. And we're going to roll the gingerbread out. So for the house itself, we're going to roll it out to about 4 millimetres in thickness. And for the decorations, we're going to roll them out about 2 millimetres in thickness. So when you're rolling, just roll at different angles to ensure that the pastry is the same thickness the whole way through. We've got that now at about 4 millimetres in thickness. I'm going to cut out the gingerbread. Be very careful that you don't pull or stretch the gingerbread at this stage, because we don't want to distort the shape of the house. So this is the roof. So some of the pieces you're going to need 2 pieces, and some of them, such as the base, you're just going to need 1. Just using a knife, just cleanly cut around the template. I'm going to use a perforated tray with a silpain mat on, which allows air to travel through, which will give me a nice flat even piece of gingerbread. If you don't have that, you can simply use a flat tray with a piece of baking paper or a baking mat to bake the gingerbread on. I would then put the gingerbread in the fridge or the freezer for a little while so that when you put it on the tray, you can angle it again and straighten it up with your template if it has distorted in shape at all. You can already see that's distorted a little bit, so we can actually bring that back with a scraper once it's chilled a little bit. So this is one of our roofs. We need to do a second one. So once you put them on the tray, if you're not going to refrigerate or freeze them first, you do need to realign the gingerbread to fit with your template so that it's going to be as straight as possible. Now with these little scraps, what I'm going to do is just roll them a little bit thinner rather than scrunching them up and putting them with the fresh dough, so I can cut out some of the ornaments for our gingerbread house. So we're going to roll these about 2 millimeters in thickness. You don't want them to be too thick because if they're too heavy, they're hard to actually apply to the house. So if you don't have cutters, you can also use cardboard templates to cut out your different shapes that we're going to use for decoration. Now these can't bake on the same tray as your house because they're going to bake in less time. So you'll need to put them on a separate tray because they'll bake for a shorter period. So I'm just going to cut out some hearts. You won't need too many of the larger pieces, but if you want to put one big snowflake or star to put where the roof joins the top of the house, that's a great idea and a nice finish, but you won't use too many of the bigger ones. You'll need roughly 25 to 30 of the individual shapes. It's better to have more so that if you need to put more on, you've got them. The ones that you don't decide to use, you can actually use them as biscuits to serve on Christmas Day. So now the offcuts that we've got, don't scrunch them up too much. Brush off any excess flour. And we're going to put them with our dough that we haven't rolled out yet. That way we're not going to overdevelop the gluten or start to overwork the dough. If we overdevelop the gluten, you'll find that the gingerbread will actually distort in shape and it can actually shrink. I've got some more dough here and I'm going to press the scraps down and put them on top of the dough. Make sure it's well dusted underneath. We dust it on top. We're going to continue cutting out pieces and then with the offcuts, we're going to cut out our decorations. Now I'm going to cut out the front of the house. We need to cut two of these. One is going to be the front and one is going to be the back. Now the back, I don't cut any holes or windows or anything like that in. I just do that for the front. So I'm going to demonstrate the front for you. So we place it down and once again we cut using our template as a guide. So when you're creating the front of the house, we need to cut out a door and a window. So we're just going to cut a rectangle out of the center. If you're not too confident doing this, you can actually measure this, find the center point, and then go out a few centimeters each side so your door is even. Don't throw the door out, we do need to bake that as well. Now we're going to cut a window with a 6 centimeter round cutter. You can also trace around a cup or a glass or use that to actually cut through the gingerbread. Don't do it too close to the edge because it can break after it's baked. Now for this bit, I'm going to put the front of the house onto the tray and I'm going to cut a frame for the window. We're going to pick up the window frame, drop it in here. Just using a small amount of water where it joins in, and just press it in so it's going to adhere to the front and bake together. So you're going to repeat this same process of rolling and cutting until you've got all the pieces of the house you require. The only piece that I cut portions out of to create negative space is the front. It's up to you if you want to cut more out, for example, of the sides to place a window in the sides, but this house, the sides are really quite low. So just to finish the front of the house, I'm going to make a little door handle. So just a little sphere. And we're going to join that onto the door with some water. Now the gingerbread pieces themselves, you don't want them to be too soft. If they're too soft, they're going to distort and bend after baking when you go to assemble your house. The other thing is they won't actually last very long once assembled. It will slowly absorb moisture and start to distort in shape. So to avoid that happening, we actually bake the gingerbread till it's really quite firm. So I would recommend the large pieces of gingerbread for approximately 8 to 10 minutes. If you take them out and the gingerbread is cool and it's flexible at all, you need to put it back in the oven for another 2 to 3 minutes or more if it needs it. So don't be afraid once it has cooled to place it back in the oven to dry it out a little bit more. We're now going to create the icing. Now this is a lot of icing. We're not going to use all of this, but the quantities in your recipe is exact. We make a soft icing first to enable us to decorate our gingerbread ornaments or the gingerbread biscuits. And then we're going to add some additional icing sugar to thicken and strengthen the royal icing to enable us to assemble the house and then pipe on it. So we'll place the egg white in first. Make sure it's free of any egg yolk. I'm going to place the icing sugar in. You can place it in all at once. Make sure it's sieved. I use a pure icing sugar. You can also get icing sugar that has 10% starch added. The reason they make that is if you're in a humid climate, your icing sugar is going to stay loose and soft and not join together and become one big cake of icing sugar. So here in Melbourne, I prefer to use a pure mixture, but icing mixture is okay as well. When mixing, we start off on a slow speed. We slowly increase the speed to incorporate a little bit of air to the icing so it thickens slightly to give us a perfect piping consistency. Check the icing periodically. So you still want it to collapse, but you want it to have some body. So now that looks like the perfect consistency for piping. With the royal icing, when you're not actually working with it, it will get a crust on top. So to avoid that happening, it's a good idea to put a damp cloth just draped over the top of the bowl. Don't have it actually touching the icing itself because the sugar will actually pull all the water out of the cloth, which you want to avoid. Just drape it over the top and then just take it off each time you need to use it. You can also keep this in the fridge for a couple of weeks and make it in advance and then just whip it up again prior to using it. Before the next step, you will need to prepare a paper piping cone. Now you can do that by watching one of our videos on paper piping bags and then come back for the next instructions. So fill the bag about halfway. Then when you're folding the bag, always fold away from the seam. Then fold the top down. Only cut a small amount off the piping bag so that you've got quite a fine line. So we've got a nice fine detail on all our little ornaments. So it's up to you what dots, stripes, squiggles that you do for your decorations, but there's lots of different finishes that you can actually do. When you're actually piping, this is called a drop line technique. So we're not actually touching the surface of the product, we're actually piping above it and then stretch the icing to ensure that you get a nice straight line. Now, straight lines aren't your thing. You can focus on dots, but you can also do squiggles as well. So this one I'm going to do a little bit of a leaf pattern on both sides of those stripes. As I said, you can make this as time consuming as you want or as fast as you would like. If your icing is actually peaking up and sticking or breaking off, it means it's a little bit too firm, and you can add additional egg white to it just to soften it a little bit. Now we're going to do some with flooded icing. When we do some with flooded icing, we need to do a border first. Then we cut a little bit more off the bag. So make sure all your fine line details are finished. And using a rotating movement, we fill it in. By rotating the bag, you're going to ensure that you pop any bubbles that are on the surface of the icing. We need to let these set for about 20 to 30 minutes, but they'll do that while we're assembling the house. So for assembling the house, we need to thicken the icing once you've finished all your decorations. Now we're going to take our original soft icing, which we use for the piping detail of our decorations. We're going to add additional sieved icing sugar to it to thicken it up enough so that we can actually assemble the house. If it's too soft, the pieces will slide off as we go to join them. So we're just going to add that icing sugar in. Once again, we're going to whisk that up to incorporate a little bit of air. Now we've fully incorporated that icing sugar and we've whipped it up as well. What you're looking for in consistency now to actually join the house is that it holds, so it won't actually move off the whisk. If it's at that consistency, you're now ready to assemble the house. I just wanted to show you this base that I have here. It has a little bit of flexibility in it. With it being flexible like this does need to go back into the oven for about 3 to 4 minutes to dry out a little bit more to ensure that we don't have too much moisture in it, because it will continue to absorb moisture from the atmosphere after we've baked it, and it will become a little bit softer. So we want it to be really quite brittle when we start to assemble the house, so that once it softens a little bit, it'll still hold quite nicely. Now I'm using a disposable piping bag and I'm using an 8mm piping nozzle. You can use 8 or 10mm piping nozzle. Either one is perfectly fine. Just going to cut a small amount off the bag and pop the nozzle in. Roll down the top of the bag. Now, if you need to at this stage, you can get somebody to assist you when you're assembling the house to make it a little bit easier. You can also fill the house with lollies. I know gingerbread house is something that children normally enjoy, and this particular one doesn't have any lollies on it at all. So if you're wanting to incorporate a little bit of that, you would actually put them in the center of the house, so when they break the house, they've got the surprise of the lollies inside. So just put the pieces out where we know they're going to go and line them up so that if you need to trim any of the pieces, you can. So if any of the edges are too round or you find that it's not going to fit squarely, and you can line them up as you go. You don't need to line them up before you start. So just do a couple of pieces at a time. So these are the first 2 pieces that we're going to join, the back and the side, and that will actually hold it up. So just filling the bag, push the icing down. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pipe here to enable us to join our side. So I'm also going to pipe across the base. So place the back of the house down onto the base, leaving about a centimetre gap between the wall and the edge. We place the side on and that will secure it at this stage. Just make sure it's all level and you're happy how that is, because you can still manipulate it a little bit before your icing sets. What we're going to do next is place on the second side. So we just line it up, make sure we're happy with how that sits. And this one we're going to pipe on the side. We're also going to pipe on the base. Don't worry about having too much icing on your gingerbread house, because it's more important that it stays up and in one piece. With the icing, we will actually cover it completely with additional icing on the outside, so you won't see any of these joins once we're finished. We're now going to do the front of the house. So for the front of the house, we're just going to pipe icing here and here. And with the front, we're going to add a little bit of additional icing on the base. So just gently press that in so that you've secured it well. Next, we're going to put the roof on. So we just pipe down on the back wall and the front of the house. We do the other side and we put both pieces of the roof on at the same time. This is where the importance comes in of how straight and even your gingerbread pieces were before you actually place them in the oven. So they need to be re-squared up to ensure that when we assemble the house, it goes together beautifully. Okay, we've got our two pieces here. So we want more of that exposed at the front rather than the back. So press the roof on. Now, if your pieces aren't straight, as I said, the roof isn't going to go on straight. So sometimes it's a good idea to align the front and back together and trim it with a serrated edge knife if needed. As soon as you put the roof on, just secure it with a small amount of royal icing just on top. Now what we're going to do is place the door on. So put some icing on the side, secure that in. Then we pipe some icing on top, just in loops with a drip at the end. Now with these ornaments that we're going to put on the front of the house, you can't do it all at once because they won't all stick and it'll be too much weight and they'll fall off. So we're going to do a couple, we're going to let them set, and then we're going to do a couple more. So just place them first to see what you actually like, and we are going to overlap them on where you'd like to see them sitting. Try not to put the same one on both sides so they do look a little bit different. We've piped the zigzag here to replicate snow, so when the door opens we get a pile of snow on the other side. Now with the ornaments, place them on and have a look. I try not to do the same on both sides, so both sides are completely different. And we're going to start by adhering the small ones on the base. And they don't all have to sit straight as well. But make sure they're not angling left or right, that they're sitting flush with the house. We then move up a little bit and we place more ornaments, and then we're going to put one in the middle. So just a little further up. Just keep going, leaving a gap in between. So once you've got that first layer on, what we're going to do is let that set for about 15 to 20 minutes. Pipe your icing back into the icing bowl. Before you start again, just beat it up a little bit, just by hand with a spoon, and fill your piping bag again to add the additional ornaments. Now we've got just a few of the ornaments on the front. We're going to give them 15 to 20 minutes to set. While we're waiting for them to set, we can start doing the other finishes around the house. So on the side here, we're just going to do some snowdrops. And the same on the side. So we're just pushing out and back down. So just doing that the whole way around. Now for the back of the house, I'm going to do some snowdrops. So just pulling it down to a peak. And we repeat that on the other side. Inside our window, we're going to do a little bit of snow just dripping out. We're at the stage now where our ornaments have had a good 20 minutes to actually secure themselves to the gingerbread house before we can put more on top. If you put too much weight on too quickly, they'll all actually collapse off. So give them a good 20 minutes at least to allow that first layer of icing to set. So this is going to be the centerpiece of the gingerbread house. So I'm going to place that in the middle. So put icing on the back. Just going to secure that on. Now we go and just fill in the gaps. So just overlap the ornaments. So where we've got a gap here, we put another ornament on it to fill that hole. Okay, now we've done the front of the house, we're going to do the roof. So just piping on, same technique. And then we're going to put some little ornaments on the roof as well. So just stand these up on a slight angle. Going to pipe some icing at the front. And we're going to put a little ornament just in the front of the house there on each side. Lastly, we're going to finish the side. And we're just going to put some drips on the side. Then we're going to pipe some icing across the side of the roof. Now you can mark this on before you actually bake it and just mark it on with a ruler, or you can measure it and scratch it afterwards, or if you've got an even eye, you can just pipe it on directly. Now to finish, we're going to dust with a small amount of icing sugar. And there we have our finished gingerbread house.